Good evening and welcome to the Saturday edition of Poland Daily. I'm Konrad Gorlinski. Well, let's take a look at the headlines. Well, the chairman of the Ukrainian parliament, Ruslan Stefanchuk, announced that Russia is responsible for the Smolensk catastrophe, the disaster that took the lives of Polish president and many other high-ranking officials. He also said that the new international laws should be created and that every country should be guaranteed sovereignty. For now, however, we're unfortunately closer to what the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, is saying. Yesterday, he admitted that he fears that this conflict might get out of hand and turn into a major war between NATO and Russia.
Due to poor training and lack of cooperation, Russian soldiers are killed by shelling of their own positions. Poor logistics and low efficiency in ongoing operations on the Russian side are compensated for by numerical superiority. Although more and more Russian recruits are being sent to the front, Ukraine is making up for the disparity in forces by using advanced technologies from the West. The situation at the front remains very difficult, especially in the key Donbas regions. The occupiers have virtually destroyed Bakhmut. I would like to thank all of our heroes, all the soldiers, the commanders who are holding the front in these areas, repelling attacks and preventing the Russians from penetrating deep into Ukraine. The large missile potential has so far enabled the Russians to fire almost blindly. The low precision of the missiles fired is evidenced by the ruined residential areas. Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence reports that the Russian army is already using missiles from the strategic reserve, which should remain on the armed forces' equipment. I heard a missile hit somewhere nearby. Later, someone knocked on the door. It was a neighbor running in and asking for help. I ran after him. It turned out that his mother was trapped in the burning building, but we managed to get her out. In the end, we tried to save their property by putting out the fire. What could be taken out of the house, we put outside. I did everything I could. The numerous attacks by Russian forces on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure testify to the particular brutality of the occupiers' offensive actions. Acts of Russian terror unite Kiev's political partners at a common negotiating table. Yesterday, the head of Polish diplomacy, Zbigniew Rau, visited U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington.
I can't think of a time when the United States and Poland and our partnership has been more important and more effective. Thanks to Poland's leadership, we are standing strong in support of Ukraine faced with the Russian aggression, supporting it in terms of security assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. Poland has done, the Polish people have done extraordinary things in their generosity towards so many refugees from Ukraine.
The war crimes committed by the Russians in Ukraine, according to Kiev, requires the establishment of a special tribunal to try those responsible. Chairman of the Supreme Council of Ukraine, Ruslan Stefanchuk, is also demanding regulation of international law to obtain reparations through confiscation of Russian property. In his opinion, the Kremlin may also reach out to other European countries pursuing the concept of Russian imperialism. In my opinion, I understand that MH17 and the tragedy in Smolensk happened with the participation of the Russian Federation, and their guilt should be proven in international institutions. What we now call everything by name, what we call today the Russian Federation as a terrorist state, this is not from 2022. This state has been behaving like this during its entire existence. Warsaw and Kiev agree that stopping Russia is only possible with cooperation and a solidarity-based foreign policy. Ukraine's ambassador to Poland, Vasyl Zwarich, says Poland will be the first country in the European Union to prioritize the reconstruction of Ukraine.
And why did Radek Sikorski insert a Russian spy into the Commission for the Liquidation of Poland's Military Information Services? Why did he recommend him for a position there? Instead of seeking answers to these questions, once again, the opposition, along with the media cartel of the Third Republic, have turned to defaming Antoni Macierewicz, the one man who continues to ask the inconvenient questions. They have been very consistent in their efforts for years now. But what are they hoping to achieve? Radosław Sikorski accuses Antoni Macierewicz and Sławomir Cęckiewicz of being the ones who admitted Tomasz L. To the commission dealing with the liquidation of the military information services. According to the documents, which I released yesterday on social media, the decision of the then president of the Council of Ministers, Jarosław Kaczyński, the entirety of the responsibility to liquidate the military information services was given to Antoni Macierewicz. Both Antoni Macierewicz and Professor Sławomir Cęckiewicz disagree with the POMP's words. Minister Sikorski made this decision. No one then, when the team for the commission of the liquidation of the military information services was being formed, had the sort of competencies that Mr. Sikorski possessed. 1. I did not know Tomasz L. 2. He was appointed to the Liquidation Commission for the Military Information Services by Sikorski, among others, and I met him then. I never had a relationship with him. 3. His role in the Liquidation Commission was marginal, and his access to knowledge was limited, which is confirmed by documents. 4. I welcome the investigation and have confidence in our services. In 2006, 2 commissions were formed to deal with the liquidation of the WSI. Antoni Macierewicz, as Deputy Minister of Defense, headed the Verification Commission, while Sławomir Cęckiewicz chaired the Liquidation Commission, whose members, according to the documents, were appointed by the Minister of Defense, Radosław Sikorski. It was in this group that Tomasz L. was included. Radosław Sikorski is known to have been simply dismissed because of his blocking of the liquidation of the military information services, which was simply a long arm of Moscow. In mid-March of this year, counterintelligence officers detained Tomasz L. on charges of spying for Russia. At the time of his arrest, he was working at Warsaw City Hall, where he was employed in the archival department of the civil registry books. According to investigators, Tomasz L. passed copied documents to Russia. And yesterday, after a China-Arab summit hosted by Riyadh, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, responded to Western criticism by saying that the kingdom is not moving away from the U.S., but wants to cooperate with both the United States and China, and added that while competition is good, polarization is not.
We have to compete as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia with a number of economies, and we compete very actively, and we have a very detailed strategy, Vision 2030, to make the country's economy more competitive. Part of that drive to being a competitive economy is cooperating and being open to cooperating with as many partners as possible. So we feel it absolutely necessary that we are fully engaged with the largest economy in the world, which is the US, which is our traditional strategic partner, and we will continue to have a very strong engagement with the US. On the other hand, China, as the second largest economy in the world, as our largest trading partner, will continue to play an important role in our plans, in our progress towards economic diversification away from oil, in building a larger, stronger, more resilient economy. So we will continue to work with all of our partners, and we don't see it as a zero-sum game by any means. We see it as a normal part of building a large and sustained economic environment.
Chinese President Xi Jinping met Gulf Arab leaders in Riyadh in the first of 2 milestone Arab summits, showcasing Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as an aspiring leader of the Middle East and a key partner for global powers. Xi Jinping, who has been welcomed in Saudi Arabia with pomp and ceremony, signed a strategic partnership pact with the world's top oil exporter a day before Friday's meeting with the energy-rich six-nation Gulf Cooperation Council. President Xi Jinping told Gulf Arab leaders that China would work to buy oil and gas in yuan, a move that would support Beijing's goal to establish its currency internationally and weaken the U.S. dollar's grip on world trade. China will continue to import large quantities of oil from Gulf Arab countries and expand imports of liquefied natural gas, strengthen cooperation in upstream oil and gas development, engineering service, storage, transportation, and refining. China will also make full use of the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange as a platform to carry out yuan settlement of oil and gas trade. Though Saudi Arabia and China signed several strategic and economic partnership deals, analysts said relations would remain anchored mostly by energy interests, though Chinese firms have made forays into technology and infrastructure sectors. Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud asked in a news conference about Washington's denial of Saudi mediation efforts in a Russia-U.S. prisoner swap, said he was aware of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's personal mediation efforts to release U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner.
We finish this evening with some news from outer space. NASA's Artemis 1 mission's uncrewed Orion capsule sailed within 130 kilometers of the lunar surface last week, achieving the closest approach to the moon for a spacecraft built to carry humans since the Apollo 17 flew and landed there over half a century ago.
As we progress, we'll land on the moon, we'll step foot on the moon, and then we'll extend the time we're on the moon longer and longer. And so those are the times where for the human, we'll be just bursting with data. We'll have tons of work to do. And it's incredibly exciting.
The spacecraft is due to return to Earth on December 11th, when it parachutes and splashes down into the sea. Officials also say they hope the recent launch will reignite public enthusiasm for space travel.
I think one of the challenges is it's almost become routine, right? People are so used to us going to the space station, and it's become so routine. It's just very matter of fact. It's part of everyday living. But I think Artemis has done a great job of kind of reawakening that excitement.
NASA says Artemis is launching a new era in space that they hope eventually will lead to Mars. Artemis is aimed at returning astronauts to the lunar surface this decade and establishing a sustainable base there as a stepping stone to future human exploration of Mars.
We had a couple experiments on board. One of them that's particularly interesting for me is there were seeds on board. And so we're going to be able to see how the radiation environment that we just went through affects the seeds. Because when we look at going to Mars, we know that we're probably going to need to grow some crops like they've done in the movies and on TV, and how we do on the space station. So we want to see how radiation is going to affect seeds that we might send to Mars.
If the mission succeeds, a crewed Artemis 2 flight around the moon and back could come as early as 2024, followed within a few years by the program's first lunar landing of astronauts with Artemis 3. Sending astronauts to Mars is expected to take at least another decade and a half to achieve. Well, as always, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Please stay with us for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and other programs. But from me, it's have a wonderful Saturday night.